Poor girl faked being ugly on blind date. Millionaire CEO saw through her and proposed instantly. 3 dates. 3 chances to scare him away. That was the deal Sarah never expected to accept. Pretend to be ugly, act unbearable, and send the billionaire CEO running. But William Scott wasn't like other men. He sat there perfectly calm, watching her messy bun, the clashing colors, the awkward jokes, and then he smiled. "You're either insane," she said, narrowing her eyes, "or you have a very strange taste." His voice was soft, almost dangerous. "Or maybe," he whispered, "I finally met someone real." That's when everything started spiraling far beyond her plan. The rain had softened into a quiet drizzle as Sarah Martinez stood in front of the mirror, staring at the bizarre reflection she'd carefully created. Oversized orange glasses perched awkwardly on her nose, a messy bun that looked like a small hurricane had spun it together, cheeks painted with uneven blush, and lipstick smeared just a touch too far beyond her natural lip line. "This is insane," she muttered, adjusting the old thrift store dress that puffed at the shoulders like it had been stolen from a bad community theater production. Social suicide? Behind her, Helena sat on the bed, trying not to laugh. "You look perfect. Exactly how my mother would imagine her future daughter-in-law's worst nightmare." Sarah sighed, arms crossed. "Remind me why I'm doing this again? Because I love my boyfriend? And because I don't have the guts to tell my parents I'm already seeing someone?" Helena grinned. "You're doing me a huge favor. Show up, act weird, scare him off. It's a win-win." "You bribed me with $90, Sarah deadpanned. "What you need," Helena added gently. And she wasn't wrong. For months now, Sarah had been juggling her culinary studies with 3 jobs. Baking at a small cafe in the mornings, selling sweets at street markets on weekends, and waiting tables at night, all while caring for her chronically ill mother. Every dollar counted, and while humiliating herself on a blind date wasn't exactly her dream Saturday night, it meant one less overdue bill to worry about. "Promise me that if this backfires, you'll protect me from your terrifying mother." Helena raised 2 fingers. "With claws, teeth, and blue eyeshadow? I swear." Taking a deep breath, Sarah grabbed her coat. "Let's get this over with." The taxi pulled up in front of the restaurant, its golden light spilling onto the slick sidewalks of Manhattan's Upper East Side. Sarah paused at the entrance, nerves gnawing at her stomach. She was about to meet a billionaire CEO. The kind of man who probably owned private islands and had assistants for his assistants. She almost turned back, but the image of her mother's medical bills anchored her. Inside, a sharply dressed waiter glanced at her with a flash of hesitation. "Name?" "Helena Darte," she answered automatically, nearly forgetting the alias. "Right this way." The dining room was elegant, quiet. Crystal glasses sparkled beneath soft chandeliers. And there, in the far corner, sat William Scott. He stood the moment he saw her. Tall, impeccably tailored navy suit, a face that looked like it had been carved from marble by a patient Renaissance artist, and eyes, piercing, cool, observant, that locked onto her with unsettling precision. For a second, Sarah forgot her own act. "Miss Helena," he greeted, extending his hand. His voice was calm, rich, and impossibly steady. "If depends," she said, trying to sound casual. "If you're selling encyclopedias, I'm her twin sister." His brow lifted slightly. "William Scott, I don't sell encyclopedias." A small pause. "Just companies." She forced a laugh as she shook his hand. "And I just sell desserts in little jars. I guess we're both in business." He smiled, but it wasn't the polite kind Sarah expected. It was a smile that said he was studying her, measuring every detail, and that unnerved her more than any rejection would have. As they sat, the waiter returned with menus. William ordered with ease, his tone crisp, yet relaxed. Sarah, determined to play her role to the fullest, wrinkled her nose at the passion fruit reduction suggestion. "I prefer my passion fruit explosive, not reduced," she quipped. To her surprise, William chuckled, a real, warm laugh. "I'll have the same," he said, eyes twinkling. "I like unpredictable flavors." Unpredictable. That was the word that kept circling her mind as the evening unfolded. She snored, talked in her sleep, claimed to have existential crises about ants. She told him she could identify pigeons by their accents, and once got kicked out of a fancy restaurant for praying to her grilled fish. Every odd confession, every outrageous story, he met them all with amused curiosity rather than retreat. "You're one of a kind," he finally said as dessert arrived. "A rare piece in the market of normal people," she joked, resting her chin on her hand. "And you," she added, voice softening despite herself. "You strike me as someone who even schedules your dreams." He smiled thoughtfully. "Maybe that's why I'm here. Someone told me you were..." Surprising. That one sentence made Sarah's breath hitch. How did he know? And then came the moment that would change everything. "You're trying to look unattractive on purpose, aren't you?" he asked suddenly. Voice gentle but firm. The air thickened. "I don't know what you're talking about," she lied, fingers nervously adjusting her glasses. "Sarah," he said. Her real name. Spoken like a secret he'd been holding. "I built an empire by reading people. And I see you." Her chest tightened. He knew. He had known from the very beginning. Instead of anger, he simply smiled again. "That's why I'm making you a bet." He leaned forward, voice dropping just enough to make her heart pound. "3 dates. You can wear anything, say anything, do anything to try and scare me off. If I quit before the 3rd date, you get $5,000. If not, you tell me who you really are." Sarah stared at him, torn between the wild absurdity of it all and the desperate practicality of what $5,000 could do for her mother's medical bills. She hesitated, and then whispered, "CEO, Chapter 1. The First Date. The Psychedelic Disaster." The following evening, Sarah stood in front of Helena's mirror once again, this time armed with a full-blown arsenal of intentional fashion crimes. "I feel like a rainbow exploded," Helena said, eyes wide as she watched Sarah pull on the pink and purple striped jumpsuit. The yellow rain boots clashed violently, and the beaded necklaces jingled around her neck in chaotic layers. A straw hat with fake flowers completed the look, leaning slightly to one side like a drunken garden ornament. "Perfect," Sarah said with forced confidence, applying a final layer of green eyeshadow and blue lipstick. "If this doesn't scare him off, nothing will." Helena crossed her arms, watching her friend through narrowed eyes. "Are you even trying to win the bet? Or are you secretly enjoying this?" "Please," Sarah said too quickly, "this is strictly business." But deep down, there was a flutter she couldn't explain. It wasn't attraction, or at least that's what she told herself. It was the strange, unsettling sensation of being seen, of being studied by a man who didn't seem fazed by her masks. The street food festival in Central Park was already buzzing with life when she arrived. Neon lights danced across rows of food stalls, couples strolled hand in hand, and children zipped between booths with sticky fingers and wide smiles. And then she saw him. William stood near a taco stand, dressed far more casually than before. A light blue dress shirt, dark jeans, and that same unshakable composure. Even in the casual crowd, he looked like he belonged to a different world. Yet the moment his eyes landed on her, they softened with something dangerously close to amusement. "Wow," he said as she approached, scanning her from head to toe. "You've really outdone yourself." "It's European street fashion," Sarah deadpanned, crossing her arms. "Clearly you don't understand artistic innovation." He let out a small laugh, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Clearly, I'm very old-fashioned. Forgive me for not recognizing genius when I see it." They started walking through the maze of vendors, with Sarah determined to crank up the weirdness. She pointed at a hot dog stand. "See those hot dogs? I always feel bad eating them. I like to thank my food before I devour it, honor their sacrifice. You know?" "Very noble," William replied with a straight face. "Though I imagine it makes fine dining rather awkward. Don't tell me I got kicked out of a seafood place for giving a 5-minute eulogy to my grilled fish." William burst into laughter, genuine and full. People nearby turned their heads to glance at them, but neither seemed to care. As the evening unfolded, the energy between them shifted. Sarah danced awkwardly to background jazz played by street performers, flailing her arms with intentional lack of coordination. William watched her with growing amusement, eventually joining her, his movements no more graceful than hers. "You dance worse than I do," she teased. Impossible, he grinned. Hear from the people who can't dance. I'm merely paying cultural respect. Sarah laughed, catching herself enjoying his company far more than she had intended. For brief moments, she forgot the act, lost in the strange chemistry sparking between their mismatched worlds. They settled on a bench by the lake, their plates of crepes balanced on their laps. Why are you really doing this? William asked suddenly, breaking their playful rhythm. His tone was softer now, more searching. Sarah took a slow bite, buying herself time. The truth, that she needed the money to help her mother, was too raw to share. She chose her answer carefully. Maybe I like a challenge. Maybe I want to see if you'll actually crack. William studied her face, his gaze more serious now. And what if I said that I'm enjoying this far more than I should? Then I'd say you have very strange taste, Sarah whispered, unable to hide the flush in her cheeks. He leaned forward, voice lowering. I've always preferred the unexpected, things that make me question what I thought I knew. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. There was something about the way he looked at her, not like she was a project or a game, but like she was a puzzle he genuinely wanted to understand. The night ended with an easy kind of silence as they walked toward the park exit. Before they parted, William turned to her, his tone once again calm and deliberate. Tomorrow night, you choose the place. Why the rush? She asked. Because, he said, stepping closer, I'm curious to see what else you've got hidden under all those layers. And because I'm enjoying this game much more than I should. Sarah's heart thudded uncomfortably. This was no longer about a silly bet. This was beginning to feel dangerously real. As she rode home in the cab, her reflection flickered in the rain-speckled window. For the first time since this strange arrangement began, she wasn't sure who was playing whom anymore. Chapter 2. The Bet That Changed Everything. By the next evening, Sarah found herself standing in front of Helena's full-length mirror again, only this time her nerves weren't entirely about the ridiculous outfit. You sure you want to go through with this? Helena asked, raising an eyebrow as Sarah pulled on an oversized neon-orange cardigan that clashed wildly with the polka-dot dress underneath. I have to, Sarah said, applying a swipe of purple lipstick. $5,000, remember? Helena crossed her arms. Are you sure that's all this is? Sarah avoided her friend's gaze, adjusting the wide-brimmed straw hat decorated with a cheap plastic flamingo. Of course it is. But even as the words left her mouth, a small voice whispered inside, and what if it isn't? The street food festival had felt playful, almost innocent, but now that Sarah had chosen this cozy little cafe in Greenwich Village for their second date, the atmosphere felt more intimate, more personal. The cafe was warm, filled with soft jazz and flickering candlelight that reflected off rustic brick walls. The scent of fresh pastries lingered in the air, mixing with the faint aroma of roasted coffee beans. William arrived right on time, wearing a dark navy coat over a simple white shirt. His eyes locked on her immediately, and the faintest flicker of amusement tugged at the corner of his mouth. But you've managed to outdo yourself again, he said, offering his hand. You look like a walking Monet painting. Picasso, Sarah corrected with a grin, but thank you. They sat at a corner table near the window, the rain outside tapping against the glass like soft applause. Sarah ordered a double cappuccino with extra vanilla syrup and 3 sugar cubes, while William settled for black coffee. As they waited for their drinks, he studied her, fingertips resting lightly on the table. You know, he said, voice smooth, most people try to impress me on dates. Sarah raised an eyebrow, pretending to be offended. Are you saying I'm not impressive? I'm saying you're refreshingly impossible. For a moment, Sarah almost smiled for real. But then she remembered why she was here, and why she couldn't afford to let herself fall into the warmth of his gaze. She leaned forward, launching into another round of absurd confessions. I once got kicked out of a yoga class for laughing during meditation. I have recurring nightmares about being chased by aggressive squirrels, and I sometimes talk to my plants like they're my coworkers. William's chuckle came quickly, and his eyes twinkled with genuine delight. You might be the strangest person I've ever met. Good, strange means you'll run away faster. But what if I like strange? Sarah froze for a moment, the air suddenly thicker between them. His words weren't playful this time, they carried weight. like he was trying to peel back another layer of her carefully constructed disguise. Dinner arrived, savory crepes for Sarah, simple chicken for William, and they ate while exchanging more playful banter. But beneath the light conversation, Sarah could feel something shifting. She had set out to create distance, to be so unbearable that he'd walk away. But William didn't just tolerate her strangeness, he was drawn to it. Every joke, every absurdity only seemed to pull him closer. As they finished their meal, the waitress cleared the table, and William leaned back slightly, his tone softening. "Can I ask you something real this time?" "Depends on the question." "Why did you agree to this? Not the money, the real reason." Sarah's throat tightened. She glanced down, fingers twisting the beaded necklace around her neck. The truth sat heavy inside her. Her mother's medical bills, the late rent notices, the exhausted nights balancing 3 jobs. But instead, she forced a small smirk. "Maybe I was curious. Maybe I wanted to see how far you'd go." William studied her quietly for a moment, his gaze unwavering. "And what if I told you, the further we go, the more I find myself wanting to stay?" Sarah's breath hitched. He wasn't playing. This wasn't some casual billionaire amusement for him. He meant it. The moment lingered between them like a fragile thread neither dared to cut. Before Sarah could reply, William shifted slightly, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're trying very hard to scare me away," he said. "And yet, here I am, more intrigued than ever." "Maybe you're just insane," she whispered back, her heart pounding. "Or maybe," his voice dropped lower, "I finally found someone real in a world full of people trying so hard to be perfect." They sat in silence for a few seconds, both aware that the game was dangerously close to becoming something else entirely. William eventually broke the tension with a small, mischievous smile. "Third date, you pick again, tomorrow." "Tomorrow," Sarah repeated, trying to steady herself. "Yes," he smiled softly. "I'm not ready to stop getting surprised by you." As she rode home that night, the walls Sarah had built so carefully around herself felt thinner than ever. And for the first time since this all began, she wondered not how she would win, but what would happen if she lost. Chapter 3: The Unexpected Spark. By the time Sarah arrived at the tiny Greenwich Village cafe the next evening, her heart was racing, far more than it should have been. Elena's words from that afternoon still echoed in her mind. "Maybe you're trying too hard. Maybe you're starting to like him." No. She wouldn't allow herself to think that way. She had survived too much to fall for someone like him. This was still a game, a bet, nothing more. And yet, tonight felt different. The bell above the door chimed softly as she stepped inside. William was already seated at a corner table wearing a simple white button-down and a navy blazer. When his eyes landed on her, a slow, genuine smile spread across his face, one that didn't feel like part of the game anymore. "You look..." He paused, studying her eclectic outfit. Orange vintage dress with blue polka dots, striped socks, and 2 mismatched shoes. Even more colorful tonight. Sarah forced a playful grin. Picasso would be proud. "I was going to say you look like pure walking joy," he said, surprising her with the softness in his voice. Joy? No one had called her that before. They ordered coffee and pie, their conversation flowing like water. Easy, unforced, warm. This time, Sarah found herself slipping into something dangerous. Honesty. "I've started writing a book," she blurted without thinking. William's eyes lit up. "Really? What's it about?" "How to annoy sophisticated people in 10 easy steps," she replied, flashing a grin. He laughed. The real kind again, the kind that made his eyes crinkle and the world around them blur. "You'd have a bestseller on your hands." Sarah found herself watching him differently tonight. The way he listened without interrupting, the way he leaned in slightly, like her words genuinely mattered. For the first time, it felt like he wasn't trying to read her. He was simply enjoying her. But the warmth shattered the moment Victoria arrived. The tall, elegant blonde appeared like a cold gust of wind, dressed in a designer suit that probably cost more than Sarah's rent for a year. Her polished smile barely masked the venom beneath. "William," she purred, stepping close. "What a surprise." Sarah stiffened as William stood up politely, though his smile faded instantly. Victoria, and this must be the artist I've heard about. Victoria's gaze swept over Sarah's mismatched clothes with thinly veiled contempt. Artist is a generous word, Sarah replied calmly, forcing a smile. I think of myself more as public entertainment. Victoria's lips curled. And how long have you two known each other? A few days, William answered before Sarah could respond. Victoria's voice dripped with condescension. William has always had peculiar tastes. You're quite different. Difference, my specialty, Sarah shot back, refusing to flinch. But then Victoria delivered the blow. Funny, she said sweetly. I heard you sell candy on the street. Such a charming little side business. Sarah's stomach dropped. Her mind raced. How did Victoria know? How much did William tell her? And most terrifying of all, how much did William really know? The rest of the encounter was a blur. Victoria eventually sauntered off, leaving behind a cloud of expensive perfume and heavy silence. Sarah turned to William, her chest tight. Did you know she was going to be here? No, he said softly. But I'm not surprised. How does she know about me? About the candy, about everything? William's gaze was steady but gentle. Victoria has ways of finding things out. And you? Sarah's voice grew colder. What do you know about me, William? He hesitated, only for a moment. I know you're juggling 3 jobs. I know you're studying culinary arts at night. I know your mother's sick. The words hit her like a slap. Her chest clenched as tears burned at the back of her throat. You investigated me, she whispered. Not exactly. You invaded my life, she snapped, standing up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. I thought this was a game, but it's been one big joke to you this whole time, hasn't it? No, William rose, his voice breaking for the first time since they met. That's not what this is. Sarah shook her head, fighting the tears. You and your rich little ex-girlfriend, playing with the poor girl who sells sweets? Some great story to share at your fancy dinners? Sarah, please. But she was already halfway to the door, her hands shaking. You don't understand, he called after her. I understand perfectly, she choked. I was never anything but a project to you. The moment she stepped out into the cold New York night, Sarah's entire chest felt hollow. For a brief moment, for the first time in years, she had let herself believe something beautiful could exist, that someone like him could actually see her, want her, love her. But she was a fool. The masks were supposed to protect her. Instead, they left her completely exposed. As she walked toward the subway, she tore off her mismatched shoes and tossed them into a trash can, as if trying to rid herself of the absurd character she'd built. No more pretending. No more fairy tales. She was done. Chapter 4. The Truth Revealed. For 3 days, Sarah avoided every corner of the city where William might find her. She canceled her candy stand shifts at Washington Square Park, skipped her usual classes, and buried herself in work, hoping that exhaustion would numb the ache in her chest. But it didn't. Not when every quiet moment filled with the memory of his voice. His gaze. That terrifying moment when she saw how much he knew, and how much of herself she had accidentally revealed. On Thursday morning, an envelope appeared under her apartment door. At first, she considered throwing it away without even opening it. But curiosity, and something deeper she refused to name, made her fingers tremble as she tore the seal. Inside was an elegant invitation to a charity auction at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Along with it, a handwritten note. Sir, I know you have every reason not to trust me, but this event supports free medical treatment for low-income families. If you want to go, I'll be there. If you don't want to see me, at least consider going for the cause. P.S. No need to dress weirdly, unless you want to. Sarah stared at the card, her stomach twisting. She wanted to throw it away. She almost did. But the words, free medical treatment, made her stop. Her mother had canceled 3 doctor's appointments last month because of money. If there was even a tiny chance this event could help other families like hers, she owed it to them to go. She called Helena that afternoon. Within an hour, her friend arrived with 3 borrowed dresses and a look that was part stylist, part therapist. You're finally going to dress like a normal person, Helena teased, holding up a simple navy blue gown. Sarah sighed, staring at herself in the mirror as Helena zipped up the back. Without the crazy costumes, she barely recognized her own reflection. "I don't know how to act like myself," Sarah whispered. "You don't have to act," Helena said softly. "Just be yourself. With a little more confidence. And if he says or does anything you don't like, you walk away. Simple." The Metropolitan Museum shimmered under soft lighting, transformed for the evening's elegant fundraiser. Waiters floated between glittering guests, carrying champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Classical music drifted through the marble halls. Sarah walked in alone, trying to steady her breath. She didn't have to search long. William spotted her almost instantly. He approached carefully, as if afraid she might bolt at any second. His tuxedo fit him perfectly, but his expression was different tonight. Cautious, almost vulnerable. "You came," he said softly. "I came for the cause," Sarah replied, keeping her voice neutral. "Not for you." "I understand." A faint smile touched the corner of his lips. "You look beautiful." She flushed despite herself but quickly masked it. "You look normal. For you." They stood quietly for a moment, neither sure how to take the next step. Finally, William offered his arm. "May I show you some of the exhibits?" Sarah hesitated. Against her better judgment, she took his arm. They walked slowly, pausing in front of paintings and sculptures. To her surprise, William didn't attempt to impress her with knowledge or wealth. Instead, he listened, genuinely, as Sarah commented on the pieces with her usual mix of humor and curiosity. "This one reminds me of you," he said suddenly, stopping in front of a vibrant abstract painting. Sarah squinted. "Because it's weird and makes no sense?" William smiled. "Because it's vibrant, unexpected, and full of layers you only see if you really look." Her heart squeezed painfully. Why was he doing this? Why did it feel so easy to fall into him again? Finally, unable to hold it in any longer, she stopped walking. "Why?" she whispered. "Why did you make that ridiculous bet with me?" William exhaled, his voice dropping. "Because you were the first person in years who didn't want anything from me." He paused, searching her face. "You were literally doing everything you could to get rid of me, and that was the most honest thing anyone had done in my world in a long time." Sarah bit her lip, the tears threatening again. "You knew who I was," she said bitterly, "from the beginning." "I did." His voice was steady now, but not because I hired anyone to dig into your life. "Then how?" William looked away briefly before meeting her eyes again, this time with something raw and unguarded in his expression. "2 months ago," he began, voice low, "I was walking through Washington Square Park after a horrible business meeting. And I saw you." Sarah's heart froze. "You were selling sweets at your little stand. A little girl didn't have enough money to buy anything, and you gave her a chocolate treat anyway. You made her laugh. You made everyone around you smile." He smiled softly, his voice cracking just slightly. "I stood there for almost 10 minutes just watching you. And I remember thinking, that woman, she's light, she's warmth. And I hadn't felt that in years." Sarah's eyes burned, her chest tight as his words sank in. You saw me there. I fell in love with you that day," William whispered. "Long before we ever officially met." The tears finally broke free, slipping down her cheeks. She tried to speak, but nothing came out. He reached up carefully, gently brushing away a tear with his thumb. "You don't have to say anything right now," he whispered. "I just wanted you to know." And for the first time in weeks, the walls between them felt dangerously thin. Chapter 5. The Charity Proposal. The following afternoon, Sarah sat at the small kitchen table in her apartment, the envelope still lying unopened beside her half-eaten lunch. Even after everything William had told her the night before, she was still struggling to process it. "He fell in love with me before we even met?" It sounded like something out of a fairy tale, and Sarah had long since given up believing in those. Her phone vibrated. A text. "William, can we meet? There's something I need to ask you. Please." Sarah stared at the message for a long moment before typing 2 simple words. "Sarah." "Okay." 1 hour. William's office sat high above Manhattan, an intimidating tower of steel and glass that made Sarah feel smaller than usual. She'd never been here before, and everything about it screamed power, wealth, and control. His assistant greeted her with a practiced, professional smile. "Mr. Scott is expecting you." The office door opened smoothly as Sarah stepped inside. William was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, hands in his pockets, eyes on the sprawling skyline. The late afternoon light made the whole city glow gold behind him. He turned as she entered, but this time there was no trace of his usual calm CEO posture. He looked nervous, truly nervous. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. "You said it was important." Sarah folded her arms, keeping a cautious distance. "So, here I am." He exhaled. "It is." William gestured for her to sit. She stayed standing. He rubbed the back of his neck, a small, almost boyish gesture that didn't fit the man who usually carried himself like a king. "I need your help," he finally said. Sarah blinked. "My help?" William drew a breath. "My grandmother, Eleanor, is sick. The doctors don't believe she has much time left." His voice broke slightly, and for a moment Sarah glimpsed something she hadn't seen before. Not the controlled billionaire, but a man simply trying to hold himself together. "She has one wish," he continued softly. "She wants to see me get married before she—" His voice trailed off and he swallowed hard. "Before she goes—" Sarah's stomach twisted. She already felt the direction this conversation was heading, and it terrified her. William stepped closer, his voice steady but urgent. "I need someone to pretend to be my fiancé, just for 1 week, until she visits and returns home. That's all." Sarah's eyes widened. "You want me to pretend to be engaged to you?" Yeah. The words hung in the air like a live wire. She shook her head in disbelief. "William, that's insane." "I know how it sounds," he said quickly, "but please, hear me out." "Why me? Why not ask Victoria, or someone from your own world?" "Because she wouldn't believe them," William replied without hesitation. "My grandmother can see through lies better than anyone. She'll only believe it if it feels real." "And I'm real?" Sarah asked bitterly. "You're the only person I've ever been able to be real with," he answered softly. The room went silent. Sarah's mind spun, her heart pounded, her instincts screamed to say no. But then William added, almost as an afterthought, "Of course, I'll compensate you for your time. I'm prepared to offer you $50,000. The number hit Sarah like a brick. $50,000. It was more than she made in 2 years combined. It would cover her mother's medical expenses. It would pay off debt. It would finally give her room to breathe. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. William saw her conflict immediately. He softened his voice. "You'd stay at my house during the visit. Separate rooms, total privacy. There will be dinners, maybe a few public events. Nothing more." Sarah forced herself to ask the question spinning in her mind. "And when it's over?" William hesitated, just for a second. "Then we go back to our lives." Sarah bit her lip hard. Every part of her wanted to run, to reject the idea outright. But $50,000 could change everything for her family, for her mother, for her entire life. "Can I set conditions?" she asked finally, her voice calm but firm. "Of course. First, no looking into my personal life beyond what you already know. No more investigations. Second, every event must be public. If at any point I want to walk away, I will, no questions asked. Third, no physical expectations. This stays professional. Agreed?" William nodded instantly. "Agreed. And one more thing," she added, her voice dropping. "If I find out you're lying about your grandmother or using me for some game, I walk." He stepped forward, his voice barely above a whisper now. "I would never do that to you." Sarah's heart squeezed painfully at the sincerity in his eyes. For a long, heavy moment, she studied him. This man who had every reason to manipulate her, but somehow made her believe he was speaking the truth. Finally, she extended her hand. "Then we have a deal, Mr. Scott." William took her hand gently, and for a brief second, Sarah felt the smallest electric current shoot up her arm. Warmth, danger, and something dangerously close to hope. "When does this circus begin?" she asked lightly. Tomorrow afternoon, William smiled, when Eleanor arrives. That night, as Sarah packed her small suitcase, Helena sat on her bed, watching her closely. "You sure you want to do this?" her friend asked. Sarah zipped her bag shut, her voice barely a whisper. "No, but I have to." Helena tilted her head. "Is it for the money?" Sarah hesitated for a beat. "Partly," she whispered, "but mostly, I think it's for me." Helena nodded, her eyes soft. "Just don't lose yourself, okay?" Sarah tried to smile. "That's the funny part. I don't even know who myself is anymore." Chapter 6. Living Under One Roof. The next morning arrived too quickly. Sarah stood frozen at the massive wrought iron gate that guarded William's Upper East Side mansion. The house behind it was something out of a different world. 3 stories of clean white stone, tall windows framed by perfectly trimmed ivy, with a grand entryway that looked like it belonged on the cover of a luxury magazine. Her suitcase suddenly felt much heavier. Before she could gather the courage to buzz the intercom, the gate swung open automatically, as if sensing her hesitation. William stood at the front door, waiting. He wasn't in a suit this time. A light blue button-down, the sleeves rolled up, and khaki pants. He looked softer. Human. "You came," he said, voice gentle. "I said I would." Sarah forced a small smile, gripping the handle of her suitcase tighter than necessary. "So let me show you around," William offered, taking her bag. His hand brushed against hers briefly, warm, steady, and it left a tiny jolt lingering in her chest. The inside was even more intimidating than the exterior. Every corner of the mansion whispered of old money. Gleaming hardwood floors, grand spiral staircases, tall ceilings dripping with crystal chandeliers. The faint scent of polished wood and fresh flowers floated in the air. "This is the living room," William said softly as they walked through a sun-drenched space with towering bookcases and modern art pieces. "Dining room's this way. The kitchen, well, it's never really been used for much cooking, I'm afraid." Sarah glanced around and whispered half to herself, "It feels like walking through a museum." William chuckled, surprising her. "I know, that's why it's never really felt like home." She glanced at him, curious. "Then why live here?" He hesitated, his voice dropping slightly. "Because I thought this was the kind of house successful people were supposed to live in." Sarah didn't answer. She understood that more than she wanted to admit. Upstairs, he led her to her room. The guest suite was larger than her entire apartment. A king-sized bed, tall windows looking out onto a private garden, and an attached bathroom with marble counters she was almost afraid to touch. "If you need anything," William said gently, "just let me know. You'll have full privacy, of course." Sarah walked slowly across the room, trying to ground herself. "And you?" she asked, turning back to face him. "Where will you be?" He smiled. "Opposite wing. Trust me, you'll barely know I'm here. Until we need to pretend otherwise." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of what they were about to do pressed between them. Later that evening, the grand dining room was set for 3. Eleanor Scott arrived precisely at 6 p.m. Sarah peeked nervously from behind the heavy wooden door as the black sedan pulled into the driveway. But instead of being helped by drivers or staff, Eleanor stepped out of the car herself, steady, graceful, and entirely in command. She was smaller than Sarah expected, but not frail. Silver hair pinned into a tidy bun, sharp blue eyes that flickered with a kind of intelligence that instantly warned Sarah. She sees everything. Look. William rushed out to meet her. "Grandma, let me carry those." "My arms work just fine, thank you," Eleanor said, waving him off, her voice rough but warm. Then her eyes shifted towards Sarah. "And you must be the young woman who's captured my impossible grandson?" Sarah froze for a moment, then stepped forward, extending a hand with the kind of polite smile she'd practiced in the mirror. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Scott." Eleanor ignored the handshake completely and pulled Sarah into a surprisingly firm hug. "None of this Mrs. Scott business. It's Grandma Eleanor now, your family." The warmth in her voice caught Sarah off guard. She had been expecting cold judgment, but instead there was warmth. Testing, yes, but not unkind. During dinner, Eleanor peppered Sarah with question after question. Her family, her studies, her future plans, how she and William met. Sarah stuck close to the version of the story they had rehearsed, as close to the truth as possible, leaving out only the messy beginnings. "You sell sweets you make yourself?" Eleanor asked, slicing into her grilled salmon. "Yes," Sarah replied, keeping her voice steady. "I learned from my mother when I was little. It's not very glamorous, but it helps pay for school." Eleanor chuckled. "Dear, I grew up on a farm. Woke up every morning at 5 a.m. to milk cows before class. Honest work is never something to be ashamed of." William watched quietly, his gaze softening with every word Sarah spoke. It was the first time she saw him fully relax around his grandmother, and it made her chest tighten in ways she wasn't ready to face. After dinner, Eleanor suggested they sit outside for fresh air. The three of them moved to the grand veranda overlooking the garden, where the night breeze whispered through tall hedges and distant city lights twinkled like silent stars. "You know, Sarah," Eleanor said suddenly, turning her sharp gaze directly on her, "I was worried about William. Always thought he might end up alone, too proud, too careful. But ever since he started talking about you, he's lighter somehow." Sarah's breath caught. She glanced toward William, who kept his eyes lowered, pretending to study the garden. "He's a good man," Sarah whispered softly. "Sometimes I think he hides behind work because he's afraid of being let down." Eleanor smiled knowingly, very insightful. Then her voice lowered just enough for only Sarah to hear. "And what about you, dear? What are you afraid of?" The question hit Sarah like a silent arrow. She wasn't ready for it. Her throat tightened as she stared out into the garden. "I'm afraid of not being enough," she whispered. "Of always reaching for something just out of my grasp." Eleanor reached over, squeezing her hand. "If William chose you, it's because you are more than enough, Sarah. He may be stubborn, but he's no fool." That night, after Eleanor went to bed, Sarah and William stood silently together in the massive kitchen. "You handled her beautifully," William said softly. "She's kind," Sarah whispered back. "And sharp." He nodded. "She is." Sarah hesitated before continuing, her voice barely audible. "William, this is dangerous." He looked at her, puzzled. "What is this?" she whispered. "Pretending like this. It's starting to feel like we're not pretending at all." William held her gaze for a long, heavy moment. Finally he spoke, voice low and honest. "Then let's stop pretending, Sarah." The words hung between them, but neither moved. Not yet. Chapter 7. The Family Interrogation. The first days living under William's roof felt oddly peaceful. In many ways, it was easier than Sarah had expected. Quiet breakfasts, Eleanor's warmth, small evening talks with William that sometimes slipped into moments that felt dangerously real. But that fragile calm shattered early one morning, when William entered the kitchen with a tight jaw and a storm behind his eyes. "They know," he said simply. Sarah, pouring coffee, froze. "Who knows?" "My family, the board, Marcus." Her stomach sank. Marcus. William's cousin, and the company's vice president, had always lingered like a shadow she tried to forget existed. "They want to meet you," William continued, his voice clipped. "Officially?" "Why?" Sarah's pulse quickened. She already knew the answer, but hearing it still made her stomach churn. "Because they're convinced you're a threat, a gold digger, a problem." Sarah stared down at the swirling coffee, forcing herself to breathe. "When?" "Today." By the time 2 p.m. arrived, Sarah's nerves were stretched thin. 3 sleek black cars pulled up to the mansion's circular drive. Out stepped William's family, an army dressed in tailored suits, crisp dresses, and cold, assessing stares. Eleanor sat calmly in her usual armchair as the family filed into the grand living room. Marcus stood at the front, flanked by his wife Patricia, thin, sharp-eyed, wrapped in jewelry that sparkled like weapons. 2 uncles followed, along with an older aunt Sarah had never met. William stood beside Sarah, his presence steady, almost like a silent shield, but she could feel the tension radiating from him. Marcus was the first to speak. "William," he said with a forced smile, "good to see you." "And this," Marcus added, turning his gaze toward Sarah, "must be the famous fiancé." Sarah extended her hand, keeping her voice even. Sarah Martinez. Marcus shook her hand with too much force, a subtle message buried inside the gesture. Patricia sat on the edge of a cream-colored armchair, already flipping open a small leather notebook. "Why don't you tell us about yourself, Sarah?" she said sweetly, as if they were conducting an interview rather than a family gathering. Sarah sat down beside William, refusing to shrink beneath the stares. "What would you like to know?" she asked. "Let's start with your education," Patricia offered, pen poised. "I'm studying culinary arts at Manhattan Community College." Marcus raised a brow. "Community college? And your parents?" Patricia pressed on. Sarah's voice didn't waver. "My mother is a widow. She's worked as a seamstress her whole life. My father passed away when I was 16. He was an electrician." The pause that followed was deliberate, loaded. "And you support yourself how?" Aunt Helen asked, her tone carrying sharp judgment. "I work 3 jobs," Sarah replied calmly. "Selling sweets is one of them. I also work at a cafe and assist with catering events to pay for my schooling and my mother's medical expenses." Her words hung in the air like an open challenge. Patricia scribbled something into her notebook. "I see." Marcus exchanged a glance with one of the uncles before delivering his next blow. "And how do you plan to balance these responsibilities with the role of being William's wife and the future Mrs. Scott? You'd be stepping into a position that carries expectations." Sarah opened her mouth, but before she could answer, William stood abruptly. "That's enough." His voice sliced through the air like a blade. "You're not here to interrogate her like she's a criminal." "William, we're simply trying to understand," Marcus said smoothly. "This is highly unexpected." "Unexpected?" William laughed once. Cold. Sharp. "The only unexpected thing here is how far my own family will go to prove their prejudice." "We're not prejudiced," Patricia protested with faux innocence. "We're being practical. Your personal choices affect this family, the company." Sarah could feel her pulse in her throat, the familiar sting of being small in a room full of people who didn't believe she belonged. But before she could speak, Eleanor's voice cut through like quiet thunder. "Enough," Eleanor said. Everyone fell silent as she stood, leaning gently on her cane. "Have you all forgotten where we came from?" The room stiffened. "Your grandfather," she continued, looking straight at Marcus, "was a farm boy who came to this country with nothing. We built this family on hard work, not privilege." She turned toward Sarah and smiled softly. "And when I look at this young woman, I see courage, I see integrity, and I see exactly the kind of strength this family was built on." "But times have changed, Grandma," Marcus argued. "The company has responsibilities." "The company," William interrupted sharply, "is doing just fine. And if my relationship offends the board, then maybe it's time I reconsider my position." Gasps whispered across the room. "You're not serious," Marcus said, suddenly losing his smooth edge. "I'm completely serious," William said, taking Sarah's hand. "I will not sacrifice my happiness to fit your narrow definitions of who's acceptable." Tears threatened Sarah's vision, but she held her ground. "You don't have to do this," she whispered to him. "I'm not doing it for you," William whispered back. "I'm doing it for us." Patricia stood up suddenly. "This is ridiculous. You're throwing away everything for a whim." Now Sarah rose too. "No," she said firmly, "I'm not a whim. I'm someone who wakes up at 5 every morning to work before class. Someone who's fought for every opportunity I've ever had. Someone who loves your son not for what he owns, but for who he is when no one's watching." The room went still. Even Marcus faltered for a moment before recovering. "Love?" he scoffed. "Love isn't enough to hold up a company or a family name?" At that, Eleanor stepped forward with her final move. One no one expected. She pulled a small velvet box from her handbag. "This," Eleanor said softly, opening the box to reveal a simple but elegant diamond ring, "belonged to William's mother. She asked me to give it to him when he found the right person." William's breath caught. Eleanor turned to him. "Well, William?" she asked with a knowing smile. The room held its breath. William looked at Sarah, his voice suddenly softer than it had been all afternoon. "Sarah," he whispered, "I know we started in the strangest way possible. But I also know you're the best thing that's ever happened to me. He sank to one knee right there in front of the shocked room. Will you marry me? For real this time? Sarah's hands flew to her mouth, her entire world spinning. She looked around at the stunned faces. Marcus, Patricia, the aunts and uncles, but none of them mattered anymore. Her eyes found William's. Tears filled her voice as she whispered, "Yes, 1,000 times yes." As William slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into his arms, Sarah finally allowed herself to believe. This wasn't pretend anymore. This was real. Chapter 8. The Real Beginning. The mansion's once cold walls seemed warmer now. The heavy marble halls that once whispered power now hummed with something far more fragile. For the first time, Sarah and William weren't acting. They no longer had to memorize fake details or carefully choreograph conversations for show. This was real. Their engagement was no longer part of an arrangement. It was the beginning of something neither had dared imagine. "You do realize we just got engaged in front of half your board," Sarah whispered that evening as they stood together in the kitchen, both still catching their breath. "I do," William said, his smile soft but full of quiet pride. "And I regret none of it." She laughed under her breath, shaking her head as she leaned against the counter. "You're insane." "Completely." He stepped closer, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "And completely in love with you." The words still felt so real, and yet true. The next morning, the sunlight poured into Sarah's guest suite, but it no longer felt like she was a guest here. Not anymore. As she dressed, Eleanor's voice called gently from the hallway, full of her usual, unflappable energy. "Come, child, we've got a wedding to plan." Sarah followed her downstairs, where Eleanor had already spread out papers and catalogs across the dining table. But not the extravagant kind. No 1,000-guest ballroom venues. No couture gowns with 6-figure price tags. Eleanor had insisted. Simple, meaningful, intimate. "You don't need all that noise," she said firmly. "Love doesn't need to be loud to be real." Sarah felt tears sting her eyes at those words. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Eleanor reached over, squeezing her hand. "You've brought life back into this house, Sarah. I haven't seen my grandson smile like that in years." The following week passed in a blur of soft preparations. Helena threw herself fully into helping with the details, arriving daily with fabric swatches, flower samples, and tiny bursts of controlled chaos. "Who would have thought I'd be maid of honor at a billionaire's wedding," she said, with a dramatic sigh one afternoon, holding up a bouquet of ivory roses. "And you, the most unlikely Cinderella." "It's not exactly a fairy tale," Sarah replied, smiling despite herself. "No," Helena agreed softly, glancing at her friend. "It's better. It's real." Sarah's mother, Diane, arrived 2 days before the wedding. When she saw Sarah standing there in her modest but beautiful gown for the first fitting, her breath caught. "You look so beautiful," Diane whispered, her hands trembling slightly as she reached out to adjust the simple veil. "You're crying," Sarah teased gently. "How could I not?" Diane smiled through tears. "After everything. After how far you've come." Sarah hugged her mother tightly, feeling once again how precious this all was, how fragile, and how impossible it once seemed. The ceremony was scheduled for Saturday afternoon. The Scott family's sprawling garden had been transformed into something out of a dream. Strings of warm lights hung from tall hedges, rows of white chairs faced a small wooden arch wrapped in delicate blooms, and the soft scent of jasmine floated in the late spring air. There were no hundreds of guests, only those who mattered. Eleanor sat proudly in the front row. Helena stood ready beside Sarah, and just beyond them Marcus and Patricia sat politely, far more subdued now, whether out of respect or silent defeat. The music began. As Sarah stepped forward, her arm linked with her mother's, she saw him. William stood beneath the arch, dressed in a navy tuxedo, his face lighting up the moment their eyes met. She could feel his gaze wrap around her like a promise. He whispered softly as she reached him, "Breathe. It's really happening." And she did. The officiant's words faded into the background. All Sarah could hear was her own heartbeat and the softness in William's eyes as he spoke his vows. "You taught me that love isn't built on appearances or performances. You let me be myself." The version of me I never knew was still there. I promised to choose you every day, in small moments and big ones. In certainty and in fear. Always. Sarah barely held back tears as she whispered her reply. You saw me when I was hiding, you stayed when I tried to push you away, and somehow you made me believe I could still be loved for exactly who I am. I promised to stand beside you, not behind you, not beneath you, but beside you. Always. When the words were finished and the rings exchanged, the officiant smiled softly. By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. William wasted no time. Their kiss was soft at first, but real. The kind of kiss that carried the weight of everything they had fought for. The guests erupted into applause, and behind them, Eleanor clapped her hands together, eyes glistening with quiet pride. That night, under a blanket of stars, Sarah and William sat together on the back veranda, hand in hand, heads resting against each other in peaceful silence. Do you realize, William whispered, that we started all of this with a ridiculous bet? Sarah smiled. Yes, and somehow, losing that bet was the best thing that ever happened to me. He turned to her, brushing his lips gently against her temple. To real beginnings, he murmured, and as the wind softly rustled the trees, Sarah allowed herself, for the first time, to truly believe it. This was her home now, and her love story had only just begun. Chapter 9. The Uninvited Storm. For the first few months, married life unfolded like a quiet, precious secret. The mansion, once cold and intimidating, had softened. The echoing halls now carried laughter. The long dining table finally hosted simple dinners, shared jokes over takeout, quiet conversations after long days. Sarah's small bakery dream in Greenwich Village had started taking shape too. With Eleanor's gentle encouragement and William's quiet support, she rented a little corner space near the park where it had all unknowingly begun. Sarah's Sweets opened its doors, simple, bright, with the scent of fresh pastries always hanging in the air. One evening, after closing the shop, Sarah arrived home to find William waiting for her in the garden. The air was cool, the moon casting silver across his face. You look exhausted, he said softly, pulling her gently into his arms. I am, she smiled, melting into him. But it's a good kind of tired. They stood like that for several long minutes, swaying gently beneath the stars. You've made this place feel like home, William whispered. I never thought anyone could. Sarah leaned back to study his face, brushing his jaw lightly with her thumb. You had a home, William. You just needed someone to turn the lights on. He smiled, pressing his lips to her forehead. And for a moment everything was still. But peace, as always, never lasted forever. The next storm arrived without warning. It began as a phone call. William was in his home office when Marcus's name flashed across the screen. His jaw tightened as he answered. What is it, Marcus? There was no greeting, only cold, precise words. I thought you should know, the press is digging into Sarah's past, and her family's. It's only a matter of time. William's blood ran cold. You've got nothing, he snapped. Not me, Marcus said calmly. But once reporters catch a scent, they don't stop. Community college? Street vendor? Single mother fighting to pay medical bills? The narrative writes itself, and investors don't like unpredictable headlines. William's hands curled into fists on his desk. Let me be clear, Marcus added. I'm not your enemy, William. I'm protecting the family name. And the company. If you care about Sarah, maybe you should start thinking about how far this will drag her into a world she may not survive. That night, William didn't sleep. He lay awake beside Sarah, watching her peaceful breathing, her hand resting softly over his heart. She looked so small and yet so strong. He hated Marcus for being right. Not about Sarah's worth, but about the world they lived in. Wealth came with teeth, with sharks, and they circled whenever something real appeared. The next morning, as they sat together on the veranda sipping coffee, William finally broke the silence. Sarah, something might be coming. She glanced up at him, sensing the weight in his voice immediately. What kind of something? The press is digging into your past, into your family, into everything. Sarah went quiet. She didn't cry, she didn't flinch. Instead, she simply whispered, "Of course they are." For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then Sarah said softly, her voice steady but sad, "I knew this might happen the moment I stepped into your world." William reached for her hand, holding it tight. "This isn't your burden to carry." "Yes, it is." She looked directly into his eyes. "Because it's our life now." Her voice grew stronger. "I won't hide who I am. I won't pretend I came from your world. If they want a scandal, let them write it." "You don't deserve this," he whispered. "Neither did you, William," she smiled weakly. "But we survived our storms before. We'll survive this one too." 2 days later, the first article appeared. Headlines danced across glossy tabloids and business gossip sites. Billionaire CEO's street vendor bride, from candy stand to corporate throne. The Cinderella marriage investors are nervous about. Paparazzi gathered near Sarah's bakery. Reporters shouted questions as she tried to open the shop. Customers began to hesitate. Sales slowed. Whispers filled the air. And yet, Sarah stood tall. She refused to close. Every day she unlocked the door, tied her apron, and baked. But the worst blow came not from strangers, but from an unexpected source. One afternoon, Patricia arrived at the bakery unannounced. Dressed sharply as ever, she stood at the counter like a queen entering foreign land. "May I help you?" Sarah asked calmly, wiping flour from her hands. Patricia smiled thinly. "I came as a concerned relative." Sarah didn't respond. "You've handled yourself impressively," Patricia continued, "but you must realize how dangerous this will get for William, for the company. Every headline hurts investor confidence. You're exposing him to risk, Sarah." Sarah held her gaze, her voice even. William made his choice. "And now," Patricia leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice, "maybe it's time you make yours, before this circus consumes both of you." For a moment, Sarah said nothing. Steady as steel, she smiled. "You know what I've learned working 3 jobs, Ms. Scott?" she whispered. "That when life throws you into the fire, you don't run, you bake." Patricia blinked. "You stay, you endure the heat, and in the end, you turn it into something sweet." Without waiting for a response, Sarah turned, walked into the kitchen, and left Patricia standing at the counter, silenced. That night, William returned home late, his face tight with frustration. "They won't stop," he admitted softly. "Marcus, Patricia, the board, the press. They won't stop until they break you." Sarah stood before him, calm but fierce. "Then let them try," she whispered. And for the first time, William saw it fully, the same quiet resilience that had first drawn him to her in that park months ago. She wasn't bending. Neither was he. Chapter 10. The Public Stand. The invitation arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning. William sat at the kitchen table, staring at the heavy, cream-colored envelope for several seconds before finally handing it to Sarah. "The Whitmore Foundation Gala," he said quietly. "The biggest charity event of the season. The board wants us there." Sarah opened it slowly. Elegant script, black tie required, the names of Manhattan's most powerful, printed like royalty on the guest list. "I don't have to go," she said gently, reading his face. "You know that, right?" William shook his head. "Yes, you do." Sarah raised an eyebrow, surprised. His voice was calm, but beneath it lived a fire she hadn't seen before. "We're not hiding anymore, Sarah," he said firmly. "If the world wants a show, let's give them the truth instead." The night of the gala arrived too fast. Inside the ballroom, glittering chandeliers dripped like diamonds from the ceiling. Gold-accented pillars surrounded a sea of tailored tuxedos and sparkling gowns. Every conversation buzzed with politics, business, power, and whispers. Whispers that followed Sarah like shadows as they walked in together. There she is, the street vendor, the girl who trapped the CEO. Sarah heard them, every word, every sidelong glance, but she held her head high. William's hand remained firmly on the small of her back, his touch steady, his presence grounding. Across the room, Marcus and Patricia hovered like vultures, surrounded by board members and investors pretending not to stare. Eleanor sat near the front, eyes twinkling with quiet defiance, watching her grandson lead his bride through a battlefield made of silk and diamonds. When the auction began, William leaned into Sarah's ear. "This is where they expect us to stumble," he whispered. "And let's make sure they're disappointed," Sarah whispered back, her voice steady but fierce. He smiled. At dinner, the inevitable confrontation arrived. Marcus approached their table, a carefully neutral smile on his face. "William, Sarah," his voice oozed false charm, "I hope you're both enjoying the evening." "We are," William replied simply, keeping his gaze level. "And you?" Marcus's eyes briefly flicked toward Sarah. "Curious, actually. Curious how long you plan to continue ignoring reality." Sarah didn't wait for William to answer. The entire table went silent. Her voice was clear and calm, carrying further than she intended. "Reality?" she repeated. "You mean my reality? The one where I worked 3 jobs to pay for my mother's medication? The one where I stood behind a food cart while you stood behind boardrooms?" Murmurs rippled through nearby tables, heads turned. "And yet," Sarah continued, voice unwavering, "the man you fear I'm not worthy of chose me. Not because I fit your mold, but because I don't." Marcus's smile twitched, barely holding. Sarah stepped closer now, not lowering her voice. "And if this family, or this board, believes my background is a liability, then perhaps you should ask yourselves why this company was built by a woman who once milked cows at 5 in the morning. She glanced toward Eleanor, whose proud smile widened. "And why your grandfather, an immigrant farmer, was allowed to build this empire from nothing." Then the ballroom went still. Even Marcus had no quick reply this time. Then softly but powerfully, William rose beside her. His voice rang with clarity. "Let me make this perfectly clear," he said. "Sarah is my wife, she is my partner, and if any investor, board member, or family member believes she weakens me, then you were never truly invested in me to begin with." The applause began quietly at first, from Eleanor, then from several other guests who had sat in silent observation all evening. Within moments, the clapping grew stronger, breaking the tension like sunlight cutting through a storm. Marcus stood frozen, watching as the room shifted beneath him. At night, back home, William and Sarah stood once again on the garden veranda. The stars above seemed to burn brighter, freer. "You were incredible," William whispered, pulling her close. "I was terrified," Sarah confessed, burying her face against his chest. "And you still stood your ground." He smiled. "That's why I fell in love with you." Sarah looked up at him, eyes shimmering under the moonlight. "You've always been my impossible," she whispered, "and somehow my safest place too." The press never fully stopped writing their stories, but they lost their power, because Sarah and William had stopped playing by their rules. They had rewritten their own, and the world, at last, had no choice but to watch them. Two souls from opposite worlds build something stronger than status. A life built on choice, on faith, and on love, where real love lives. Years later, when Sarah looked back at how it all began, at that first absurd blind date, at her ridiculous outfits and awkward jokes, it almost felt like watching someone else's life. But the memory of that first moment still stayed vivid. The moment William Scott looked at her, past the mask, past the games, and saw her. Not the ugly disguise, not the girl trying to scare him away, not the girl struggling to survive, but her. Her world wasn't perfect. There were still whispers, articles, occasional photographs snapped by bored paparazzi, desperate for another headline. But those voices grew softer with time, drowned out by the quiet rhythm they built together. Mornings baking at Sarah's little cafe. Evenings walking hand in hand through Central Park. Late nights sitting on the back veranda, watching their children chase fireflies beneath the city lights. Eleanor passed away peacefully 2 years after their wedding, but not before holding her great-granddaughter in her arms, smiling through her tears, whispering, "You see, love has always been the best kind of legacy." And William, the man who once lived inside cold glass towers, discovered something he never knew he was missing. A home that wasn't made of walls, but of hands held. of laughter, shared, of quiet, ordinary moments that never made the papers, but made a life. Sarah often whispered to herself when the days grew heavy, when the world outside still felt like it didn't understand. We never fit their story, but we made our own. Because in the end, love, real love, isn't about where you came from. It's about who stays, who fights beside you, who chooses you again and again, even when the world tries to tear you apart. And sometimes, love starts exactly where you least expect it. At the table where you tried your hardest to make someone walk away, and they refused. Thank you for listening to Sarah and William's story. If this touched your heart, share your thoughts below. And remember, sometimes the right person doesn't see your mask. They see your soul.